I've actually been working on enhancing cultural diversity in hospitals since 2004, basically since I started becoming a medical officer. This tells you how young I am, actually. But apart from that, I've also been the chairperson of the Committee of the Service for Diverse Ethnicities. And during the course of this presentation, I will be presenting some of the extremely good work that the committee and its members have done for ethnic minorities in the New Territories West Cluster. And I have sought permission from them for this presentation or presenting some of the extremely good work. So before we go on to talk a little bit about embracing cultural diversity, I think it is very important to know your client. Now, know your client, which is KYC, is a very, very common thing in corporate worlds and even at banks. And that's why I think the first question that we need to really answer is that we need to know the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. And after we know the ethnic minorities we are dealing with, we actually need to know what is already available in HA. And, once we know what is already available in HA, we can perhaps know a little bit about the basics or more in depth about the cultures and traditional practices of the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. Only then will we be able to further improve service provision for them. And actually, the outline of my lecture is going to be based on these 4 points. So let's start with knowing the ethnic minorities we are dealing with. So actually, I'm going to refer to the 2016 bi-census report, which actually has a subsection on ethnic minorities. And according to the 2016 bi-census report, actually, more than 500,000 of our population belong to ethnic minorities, which is forming about 8% of the total population. And actually, when we compare to 2006, the number of ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong has actually increased by 71%. That's a very huge jump. And apart from that, when we talk about which ethnic minorities are the most common in Hong Kong, obviously it is Filipinos, Indonesians, followed by South Asians. Now, when we, like I told you, that the number of ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong have been increasing over the past decade or 2 decades. And as you can see, in 2006, ethnic minorities only formed 5% of the total population, and they had already become 8% of the total population by 2016, which basically means that 1 in 10 people you meet are going to be belonging to ethnic minorities. So in healthcare, we are bound to run into them. So after we know this, the second point I want to make is that the percentage of ethnic minority population in Hong Kong. So as we know, the majorities are Filipinos and Indonesian, and they usually belong to the foreign domestic helper category. And then we also have Caucasians, which belong to the expat category. When we look at South Asian, we are actually talking about 3 different communities. And when you look at South Asian people, we actually are dealing with majority Indian, Nepalese, and Pakistanis. And actually, if we look at the bi-census report, about 14% of all ethnic minorities are born in Hong Kong. So 80,000 of them were actually born in Hong Kong. So they are no different from any other person that we meet who's born in Hong Kong and have the same rights. From this 14%, actually a majority of them belong to the South Asian community in comparison to Caucasians, Filipinos, or Indonesians. So when we look at this, after we know that there are so many ethnic minorities living in Hong Kong, we have to look at where they're living. And actually, I think we all know where they're living. Recent headlines have told us a lot already. But you can see that when we compare 2006 to 2016, the trend has been moving away from Hong Kong Island and has actually been moving towards Kowloon and New Territories. And in 2016 already, the most populated area with ethnic minorities was area number 14, which is no doubtly the Yau Chim Mong district, which has been heavily in the news in the past few days. And actually, if you look at it in 2006, if you exclude foreign domestic helpers, majority of the population was living in Hong Kong side and now is living in Yau Chim Mong. So this basically tells you the dynamics of ethnic minorities, which has been changing. Probably the expat population is moving back, and we are having more and more ethnic minority people who are moving in or who are born in Hong Kong. And actually in Yau Chim Mong district itself, the number of ethnic minorities has actually more than doubled in the past decade. So from just being 4% living in Yaojimon district, 9.1% are now living in Yaojimon district. And Yaojimon district actually falls under our Kowloon Central Cluster, and where Hong Kong Children's Hospital also belongs in the Yaojimon district. So we know where they're living. So what about a little bit more about their characteristics? So we'll start by education, because education tends to basically determine their job and their socioeconomic background quite a bit. So if you can look at the education characteristics of ethnic minorities, majority of them don't have any difference in primary schools, kindergartens, and even secondary schools. The major difference between ethnic minorities and the whole population comes in the tertiary education sector. You can see that less than 1/3 of them actually achieve any tertiary education, when compared to about half of the whole population which achieves tertiary education. Without tertiary education, no doubtly, they mostly end up doing elementary unskilled jobs. So actually, if you compare to the whole population, ethnic minorities, 75% of them tend to end up doing elementary jobs. Now, you may argue with me that this figure is so high because we are including foreign domestic helpers. So let's exclude the Filipinos and let's exclude the Indonesian helpers. If you look at just the South Asian population, even if I remove the other foreign domestic helper category, still almost 40% of them are only doing elementary job, which is double of our whole population. And obviously, if they're going to do elementary jobs, no doubtedly their annual or their median monthly income is going to be much lower than our general population. And so when we look at ethnic minorities, they usually tend to belong to lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think the other very important characteristic that I want to talk about is the language spoken. Because language is the main basis of communication with them, which is an integral part of providing healthcare for them. So actually, if you look at Filipinos, Indonesian, and Caucasians, surprisingly, more than 70% of them either speak Cantonese or English, which is most of the time, most of our population speak those two languages. And so we can easily communicate with Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians. It is the South Asian population in which only 6% speak Cantonese and only 23% speak English. So we tend to have huge difficulty when communicating with the South Asian group of ethnic minority. And I'm sure those working in the hospitals already know that this is actually a major problem we face. So in summary, from the statistics that I've just mentioned, is that the population of ethnic minority in Hong Kong is definitely rising, and we are bound to encounter ethnic minorities while we provide healthcare. Many ethnic minorities have at most achieved secondary education. They have poor economic background, and a proportion of them don't speak Cantonese or English. And actually, when I talk to a lot of ethnic minorities, they believe that it doesn't make any difference if they seek help from private or government, because in both situations, communication is going to be a problem. So they rather opt for the cheaper option. So many of them actually tend to come back to government services, medical services that are provided by the government. So we are bound to see them a lot in the hospital authority family. So let's move on to the patient charter in Hong Kong. Now, you know that there is a patient's charter, and regardless of race, religion, sex, etc., all patients have a right to medical treatment. All patients have a right to information. They have a right to choices, right to privacy, and right to complain. And actually, what I want to say is that our hospital authority has been extremely concerned about the rights of patients with special needs, including ethnic minorities. And actually, it has been extremely dedicated to serving ethnic minorities. It has done a lot for ethnic minorities, and actually all public hospitals generally provide the 4 services that I've listed below. Number 1, they provide interpretation services. Number 2, they provide communication tools in different languages. Number 3, they provide special diets. And number 4, they provide special staff training regarding ethnic minorities. So let's talk about interpretation service. So when we talk about interpretation service, actually, the government has been providing language interpretation services either through service contractors or through part-time court interpreters or volunteers and consulates. And currently, our interpretation services actually covers 19 minority languages. And, you know, pre-COVID era, we could get the translator to come in person to provide the interpretation service for us. But because of COVID, they are mostly accessible by phone, when you call them through the operators. So actually, I have the figure from 2016 to 2017. This interpretation service was actually used more than 12,000 times, which is a significant amount of times, especially considering that most Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians can speak either English or Chinese. So obviously, this 12,000 is mainly being used by other ethnic languages. So despite HA having this provision, I think the most difficult part is who speaks what language, because I feel sometimes our staff gets confused about which languages does which ethnic background speak. Now, we all know that Filipinos, Indonesians, and Caucasians usually speak only like Tagalog, Bahasa, or English. It is in the South Asian community that people usually get more confused about, which language interpreter should I get for them? And actually, most people don't even know which South Asian countries are there. So geography, coming back to geography, there are actually 7 different South Asian countries. And I think majority of people can name 4 out of 7, but I think beyond that, I think you still need to look back to Google or to your geography books. So just having a little bit of sort of a little geography lesson, I would say that there are 7 different South Asian countries. Majority of them also speak just one language, but places like Pakistan or India actually speak multiple languages. So if you just follow these flags and actually request for an interpreter, you may still not be able to communicate with your client, because usually, say for example, you look at the flag for Sri Lanka, you will only get one language, Sinhala, for them, but they may be speaking Tamil, which obviously if you get Sinhala interpreters for them, you will still not be able to communicate with them. So I think it is very important to ask them what language they speak, and then you can use the service which HA provides more efficiently. Also, the Hong Kong SKH Lady MacLehose Center, which runs the Hong Kong translingual services for our hospital, actually provides yearly talks in various clusters, including like the New Territories West cluster. It even held a talk in Children's Hospital in December 2020, and they provide extremely useful information on the nitsy-gritty on how you can actually use this interpretation service. And I would actually highly recommend people who have newly joined the Hospital Authority family to actually take part in these talks so that they know how to provide service for their clients. So moving on from interpretation, I'll be talking about communication tools in different languages. And actually, if you go to the business support service department of Hospital Authority, it has many cue cards, consent forms, information sheets, and even like other admission documents in many different languages, easily available to be downloaded. For example, this is the cue sheet for abdominal pain. Now, on one side, you have the Chinese English translation, and on the other side, you have an Urdu English translation. And it's simple questions like, how long have you had the abdominal pain? Do you have diarrhea? Do you have vomiting? And honestly, I think using these cue sheets might be more quicker than even typing out on Google Translate. So I know a lot of doctors are using Google Translate, but if you know that there are many of these cue sheets available, you can utilize them in situations, especially when you're in the middle of the night and you're admitting an ethnic minority patient and you don't have access to translators. Also, many different clusters have the patient's charter, which is also translated in different languages, which can make ethnic minorities aware of their rights in the hospital settings. If you actually go visit the Hospital Authority website as a visitor, there is a section which is on different languages. And if you click on that, it also has 8 languages, and if you click on each of the language, it actually gives you thorough information on GOPD services, on clinic services, on fees and charges, and it also gives you basic information on things like COVID or even visiting hours. And I think it is extremely useful for our staff to direct our patients to these websites so that they can get the appropriate information they need. Apart from that, I personally work in the metabolic field, and we do a lot of work about newborn screening for inborn errors of metabolism. And we have actually translated the information sheet regarding the newborn screening for inborn errors of metabolism in different languages. And so in this way, all babies born in Hong Kong, regardless of their ethnicity, can have an informed consent to whether they would like this newborn screening done. Also, I am aware of different units actually collaborating with NGOs in translating and proofreading material. And you can see that this information has actually been translated by the pediatric unit at Tuen Mun Hospital. And they are very simple daily stuff that nurses need to explain to ethnic minorities, such as how do you clean an aero chamber, or how do you disinfect a milk bottle, which is very basic things, but which are done day in and day out in the pediatric units. And so different people are collaborating with NGOs to do this. At the same time, our very close partner in providing healthcare for ethnic minorities is Department of Health. And if you actually go to their family health service, they also have a lot of information translated in different languages already. And when I say already, I mean like they have a lot of information on child health and on maternal health. And if you look at them, actually, they have all the immunization fact sheets available in different languages. They have developmental milestones available in different languages. And when it comes to women's health, they actually have a lot of information on contraception, family planning in different languages. And that's why I think that it's very important that we use everything that is already available. However, despite having such good tools available, there is a problem which arises sometimes, and that is because sometimes our clients cannot read and cannot write. And actually, if you look at the BICensus report, if you look at the Pakistani, Nepalese, and Thais, actually, and on an average, 6% of them have never been to school. So if they have never been to school, they cannot read or write. And when we want translators, because they can speak, they're not readily available 24/7. So what do we do in situations like that? So in the situations like that, you have to be extremely innovative. And I'm going to present to you in the next few slides some extremely innovative ways different staff have used to enhance communication with this group of patients when they don't know how to read and write. So in the New Territories West Cluster, in the blood taking or the specimen collection room, they actually have picto cards. So in which basically they have pictures. So even if the patient cannot read or write, just by looking at the simple picture, they know what's coming next or what they're supposed to do. On the other hand, the pediatric department, in collaboration with the IT department of the New Territories West Cluster, actually came up with an iPad app. And this app is extremely useful because it has different languages. What you need to do is you need to input the hospital number of the patient. Once you do that, you give the iPad to the family member. The family member will help you input the immunization history, the TOCC history, and in the end, you can actually print out a proper admission document, which most nurses usually do, and you can actually put it in the clinical notes of the patient. This saves a lot of time in the middle of the night when you can't have access to translators. And this app has actually now a much more upgraded version in which there's also a sound function. So if the patient cannot read or write, if you click the sound button, it will basically speak aloud all the lines for them. And so this is an extremely innovative way to basically improve communication with ethnic minorities, and it targets 3 languages, Nepalese, Pakistanis, and Hindis at the moment. And you can see that this program already began over a decade ago. So you can see that people are using innovative ways to communicate with ethnic minorities. even for concerning newborn screening, apart from just having written material, we also have a video. So if the written material and the video go hand in hand, I think the understanding of these patients is much more with regards to newborn screening. So we came across one mother who didn't know how to read or write, and we needed to provide her with a very, very complicated diet treatment because this child needed to have a very limited amount of protein. So our dietitians used an extremely innovative picture diet sheet for them. And so this is a diet prescription for someone, but without using much words, just using some simple numbers and using some pictures. So you can see that this diet sheet you can see that this diet sheet will tell you that in the daytime at 8 o'clock and at noon what you're supposed to feed her, and you're supposed to feed her the same thing at night. At the same time, it tells you that when the child falls sick, what you're supposed to do in very simple pictograms. And I think the patients really understand this when we give them this, but it does take a lot of effort on part of our dietitians. On the other hand, when a patient can't read and write, and when you give them medicines, they actually don't know how to comply to it when they go home because they don't know how much they're supposed to give. So when our general ward nurses at Children's Hospital realized this, they came up with a very innovative way. They took a picture of the bottle of the medicine. They actually drawn out the syringe to tell them how much they're supposed to take. And they even gave them the simple clock to tell them what time they're supposed to take. And this way, even if a patient does not know how to read or write, they know what they're supposed to give their child at what time. And so these are very innovative ways to improve communication with patients. We also came across a patient very recently whose mother did not know how to take the MTR, and she could not come to the hospital because she does not know how to tell the taxi driver Hong Kong Children's Hospital. So our specialty nurses actually made up this very cute card for her and told her whenever you're coming to the hospital, just show the taxi driver this card, and if there's any difficulty, they can call the nurses. Sorry for listing out their numbers. Call these numbers, and then they can easily tell the taxi driver where to come and how to come. So in this way, we've actually improved communication with different clients using different means. So now you know that there are a lot of communication tools available in different languages and how you can enhance the tools which are already available. Next, I'll be talking about special diets. Now, when it comes to diets, I feel that diets are mainly based on either beliefs or on religion. Majoritarily religion. So if you look at the different ethnic minorities, if you know what religion they belong to, you can easily determine what kind of diet they would prefer. And as you can see, the Indonesians, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis all belong to Islam, which is the religion they follow, and thus they will mostly have halal meat. On the other hand, if you take someone who comes from India, he could belong to many different religions, and thus the meal that he would request for depends on what religion he follows. And that's why it's very important that if someone tells you they're Indian, when you are requesting a meal for them, they don't automatically have a no beef or a vegetarian meal. You need to actually ask them what religion they belong to and what diet would they prefer. Another thing that I commonly see in a hospital setting is that people do not know the difference between halal food and vegetarian food, or they can't differentiate what's the difference. Now, halal simply means forbidden. No, permissible. Sorry, halal means permissible and haram means forbidden. So in Islam, if a food is permissible, it is usually the animals are slaughtered in a certain way, and all of them tend to have a certain certificate attached to them so that they know that this food has been slaughtered in the method which is allowed in their religion. And anything which is pork-based, which has blood, which has alcohol, is actually forbidden in Islam. So it is very important that we know these basics before we are ordering food for them. At the same time, you'll ask me, so what does HA provide? And HA is actually extremely good. It does provide you with Western, halal, vegetarian, and no beef options. So, with so many options, and you can see that actually on halal food, Usually, if we say that the food is halal, they have actually obtained the halal mark and certification from the Hong Kong Islamic Trust Fund Association, and usually the production staff have received relevant training. In certain clusters, they even use haram-free bowl. Now, you may ask me, what is a haram-free bowl? It's basically that bowl has not been used to cook forbidden meat before. So you usually tend to give them plastic bowls instead of giving them other cutlery. So different clusters have different ways to provide halal meal to their clients. We also provide Western and vegetarian options, as you can see. So what may be the difficulty arising when HA is doing such a good job? I think the difficulty arises is that the staff does not know what to order when or how to order when. So I think this is one of the problems we usually face, and I think this problem can be very easily tackled. I mean to say, there are different manuals available in each cluster, which actually gives you diet ordering tips or tells you how to learn more about halal foods. And I think if staff is responsible for ordering meals, they should actively go and learn about this so that they are providing their clients with the appropriate diet that they deserve. The other problem which arises from, despite hospital authority providing such lovely facilities for these patients, is that patients do not know what is available, and patients do not know what is in the meals. Now, I'll give you an example. I give you these two meals. Can you tell me what is in them? Can you even tell me whether the chicken is halal or not? So, if you look at the ingredients, actually, the one with the chicken is actually just a Western or a no beef meal. So it's serving pasta instead of rice, and it's serving baked chicken and tomato sauce. And the vegetarian meal is just tuat mushrooms and red dates with veggies and rice. But if I was a patient, I wouldn't know if the soup is chicken broth. So I wouldn't be able to trust what is being provided. So I think there are two ways to settle this problem. Number one, we need to promulgate to patients that we do have such kind of foods available with the appropriate certification. So if we are serving halal food, maybe to very appropriately put up posters in major patient areas so that they know that we have this facility and it is undergoing proper under the Islamic law and everything. The second one is, if patients do not know what is in the meals, perhaps we need to design some menu cards for special meals, and that may easily help the problem, and it may even carry forward all the good work that we've been doing or our catering service has been doing. The other thing why it is important, so, normally when patients don't know what is available, and I know that a lot of Muslim patients have told me that because they're not sure if the meat is halal or not, they tend to choose vegetarian options because they just think that's easier, that's safer. But actually ordering just vegetarian meals is not the solution, especially for chronic cases, because it would mean inadequate nutrition, or if you're going to feed a diabetic patient with just carbohydrates instead of proper meat, that's not going to work in the long run. And sometimes vegetarian meals may also have some hidden forbidden food, such as gelatin, animal starch, and chicken broth. So I think it's very important that we promulgate to the patients that we are serving halal food and that it is very legitimate. So after talking about special diets, let's talk about staff training. Now, actually, HA has a lot of online e-learning courses with a lot of animated training videos, and which is very easily accessible to our frontline staff. And basically, these e-learning courses aims to increase awareness of staff with regards to ethnic minorities. And they have extremely rich content because they're introducing you to the interpretation service, they are introducing you to the minorities and the languages they speak, they will remind you of the racial discrimination ordinance, and they will also tell you the differences in different cultures, and they will tell you what is appropriate in what culture and what is not. However, these e-learning courses are of course not compulsory, and so that's why we still see that when I deal with a lot of healthcare providers, they still can't differentiate different religions and practices and beliefs. So I'm going to take a few slides to actually try to explain different religions and cultures at a glance. So the three main religions that I'm going to talk about is Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism. So when we talk about Islam, I think a majority of you know that there's a specific dress code for women. So you know that different women tend to fully cover themselves. They are not supposed to show their hair, their arms, or their legs. And usually men are also covered, pretty much very much covered. And this is part of their religious belief. But what this makes them prone to is this makes them very prone to vitamin D deficiency. And actually, in Australia, every Muslim patient that comes in is given a mega dose of vitamin D because they know, even without checking, that they will be vitamin D deficient. On the other hand, we also know that men in Islam are allowed to have 4 marriages. Of course, it is not the case in Hong Kong, but sometimes these men may have wives back in Pakistan or in Middle East, so this may not just be one wife that they have, the one here in Hong Kong. The other thing which is very common in Islam is consanguineous marriages are very common. So you tend to see a lot of rare disorders for people belonging to the Islam faith. Now, I also feel that one thing we can do is to be more culturally sensitive is when we can call a patient by his appropriate name. So I feel that many people do not know how to interpret Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh names. And actually, in Islam, there is no first name, no middle name, and no last name. Actually, the names are just a chain of names. So they tend to have a personal name, and then they tend to have a religious title, which is chosen from one of the 99 names of God. Then they tend to have the order of birth. So Abu Karim means firstborn, like Abu means first. And then they tend to have their father or their grandfather's name. Then they tend to have the character of the person. And then they tend to have the person's occupation or geographical location. So if I give you an example, we can start with the bottom one because it's the easiest. So this is Osama bin Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden. So his personal name is just Osama. All these are just his grandfather's names, and this is his father's name. So there's no real surname. If you look at this option, this is a little bit more difficult. If you look at Abdul Rahman bin Omar al-Ahmed, so again, there's no surname. Abdul is just God's name, Rahman is his actual name, bin Omar is his father's name, and Al-Ahmad is basically the geographical location of the family in the Middle East. So if you just call him Rahman, that is not right. If you just call him Abdul, that's also not right. So I think it's important to call him Abdul Rahman. So I think that it's very important to know how to address a person if you want to develop a good relationship with them. When it comes to women, actually, we see a lot of Bibis and a lot of Begums, and people tend to think that is their surname, but actually it just means Miss or Mrs. So it doesn't really mean anything. So normally you just see women having names such as Bibi, Sobia, and it just means Miss Sobia. It doesn't have any surname, any middle name attached to it. So if you know that, you'll be able to address them better. So there are a lot of do's and don'ts in Islam. So because Islam is a fairly conservative religion, so we normally say that a female patient would generally prefer a female doctor. If you could order halal food for them, that would be fantastic. They usually tend to need to pray 5 times in a day. And so, if you could provide them with a praying space, that would be very nice. Friday is a special religious day for them, just like Jews. And so if you could avoid follow-up on Friday, that would be actually quite ideal for them. And in Islam, there's a fasting month every year, and it's called Ramadan. And I'm sure even when we are fasting, we want to avoid all sorts of procedures and follow-ups. And so if we could avoid procedures and follow-ups during that period, unless it's an emergency, I think they would really appreciate that quite a bit. And also they tend to have specific death customs, such as the body needs to face Mecca, they need to sprinkle holy water on them, and the burial needs to take place within 24 hours. So the don'ts is that, especially for gynecological cases, I think Pakistani women would prefer a female doctor. Don't ever give them non-halal food. And even previously, medications used to have some ingredients, like when insulin used to be made in the olden days using some part of the swine, that was considered forbidden. But now this is not the case in today's day and age. And the other thing is that they do not appreciate termination of pregnancy. So if they do have rare conditions in them and they do agree to termination of pregnancy, I would advise it to have the termination of pregnancy arranged as soon as possible. Because once the baby becomes above 12 weeks of gestation, they actually are very against termination of pregnancy. Yeah. So I spoke about Islam, and I'll talk about Hindu. Okay, so in Hinduism, I am a Hindu. We worship multiple gods. We have a lot of festivals, and a lot of festivals is marked by a lot of religious sweets. So we need to tell these patients, especially who are obese, who have diabetes, to really control their sweets when they're having religious festivals. Mostly our food is vegetarian, or some don't eat beef, depending on how conservative they are. People usually tend to wear a lot of protective jewelry, so they usually tend to have a lot of black threads or gold chains or something of that sort, which is considered quite protective. Their names are first name, middle name, and last name. And so I will tell you my name. Kiran Moti Belaramani is my name. Kiran is my personal name. Moti is my father's name, and Belaramani is my surname. In Hindus, after marriage, a woman changes her name completely. So her first name will also change. Her middle name will become her husband's name, and her last name will become her husband's surname. So I have a lot of childhood friends who actually search me on social media, and I don't know who they are because their name has completely changed until I don't look at the picture. So sometimes when your patients become adults, their names may have completely changed and you will not be able to trace them back. And Hindus are usually cremated, and they're not buried when they die. So Sikhism. Now, many people tend to get very confused between Hinduism and Sikhism. Now, Sikhism is a religion which comes from the north of India, from Punjab, and usually they tend to follow the 5 Ks. So it is a K in Hindi, but in English it's hair, comb, underwear, bangle, and knife. So they basically all tend to have very long hair. So the men usually tend to have turbans. They tend to carry a comb, a bangle, and a knife with them at all times to protect themselves. And they are they believe a lot in cleanliness. So they believe in bathing and wearing an underwear at all cost. So their names are usually Singh, which actually means lion, and Kaur, which actually means princess. So Kaur is usually for women and Singh is usually for men. And usually they are cremated when they die. So basically for Sikhism, I think the biggest don'ts is that they don't like to be separated from the 5 Ks unless they are bathing. So if they could be allowed to carry them with them, I mean, if they're carrying a small knife, it's not to injure staff, but it's just part of their religion. And if we understand that, I think they would be quite appreciative. So now that we know our ethnic minorities that we're dealing with, we know what is available in HA, and we know a little bit about their culture and traditional practices, how can we further improve services for them? So I think, if you want to further improve services for them, we need to be very creative, and we really need to take the extra mile. So I think there are a few things. Like I said, there are so many things available in HA. The first thing we need to do is we need to raise staff awareness, and we need to have extremely easy access to information. This is very important. The second thing we really need to do is we need to cater to special needs and customs more formally than we are currently doing. The third thing we need to do is after doing so much for these patients, if we cannot engage ethnic minorities, then we are actually at a total loss. So let's talk about raising staff awareness and ease of access to information. So I'll be talking to you about what the NTWS cluster has done. For many, many years, it has come up with something called the Ethnic Minority Calendar. So they have actually come up with this calendar in collaboration with the Hong Kong Christian Services, which marks festival in India, Nepal, and Pakistan. And it basically is to assist colleagues to make appointments for these patients. Now, these calendars are attached on every outpatient clinic boards, like in the rooms, and also in the radiology departments and different departments making different meetings. So if they can look at this calendar and they know it's the month of Ramadan, they will avoid all sort of procedures during that time. Now, having this calendar will reduce the default rate, will definitely improve patient satisfaction, and will reduce rescheduling work. So it is an extremely good initiative that they have done. The second one is we need to have easy access to information. So, if you look at the Children's Hospital website, if you go on the General Administration and Interpretation Service, actually they have a lot of information there, which actually tells you about how to book interpretation service, and it even has links to basically the translated documents which are available for HA. Similarly, in the NTWS cluster, there is an ethnic minority corner which basically has all the information under one roof. So you can see even they have the ethnic minority calendar there, they have all the spiritual and cultural support for these clients, and so they essentially have all the information under one roof, so the staff can easily access it. For those who are not so tech savvy, they also have a board in the major staff area, so that those staff who are not so tech savvy can refer to that if they want to provide care for ethnic minorities. So after we talked about what we can do to raise staff awareness, now it's about taking the extra mile. Now I